There is a place in Georgia where even the Alps would envy the mountains. It is a place from which you return with a few unnecessary extra pounds on your ribs and a few memories that are not at all unnecessary. A place where so much snow can fall in the middle of spring that it won't let you go. It looks like we're staying here. It is a place with a rich history, hospitable people, incredible countryside vibe, and of course, scenery. And as is often the case with the most beautiful places, it's tricky to get there. To be honest, I have long lost that feeling of anticipation of flying, because I fly by plane quite often and it doesn't surprise me anymore. But today this wonderful feeling has returned to me, because a very unusual flight awaits me. The things that make this flight unusual begin with the fact that 2.5 hours before departure, there is no one at the tiny Natakhtari airport. An empty lobby, an empty cafeteria, and an empty runway. It feels like you've arrived at some abandoned air museum. But the fact that there is something modern in this aviation time capsule is given away by the flight schedule on the wall, which is this printout in a file, and a few fairly modern small planes that are parked here. These flights on tiny planes are operated by a company with a very romantic name, Vanilla Sky, and let's talk a little about the features of these flights. First of all, our ticket costs only $30, and that's a ridiculous price for traveling almost all the way across Georgia. Secondly, only 33 pounds of luggage are allowed per passenger, including the carry-on. And third, probably the most important thing about these flights is that it is extremely dependent on the weather. If it's cloudy, raining, or foggy at the destination point, the planes refuse to fly, and the ticket is probably rescheduled to later or canceled, and you get your money back. So if you're planning your trip to Svaneti in advance, it is probably best not to rely heavily on this flight. But if your schedule is flexible and you have a chance to walk around in Tbilisi for a couple of days and wait for the next flight or cancel your trip altogether, this is probably the greatest option to travel there. An hour before departure, the first passengers arrived in a transfer van from Tbilisi, and the staff was already at the counter and made a quasi-check-in very quickly according to their list. Then there was a very quick security check in which we went into a partitioned off section, weighed and scanned our luggage, and through the same section we went directly to the runway, on which, together with the pilots, who happened to be from the Czech Republic, we walked to our transport. This is the luxury shuttle we're going to fly. And I think you've guessed by now that there are no seat assignments, so you take a seat on a first-come basis. Well, at least the seats for the pilots were reserved. I was really lucky that when my neighbor saw my camera, he offered me a window seat because it was his 4th such flight, so he gave me the opportunity to do some filming, and I'm very thankful for that because there was a lot to film. Buckle up and let's go. The plane flies so low above Georgia's very terrain that I had internet and navigation working throughout the entire flight. Speaking of navigation, as you probably understood, we are flying from the Tbilisi region to Svaneti, a hard-to-reach region in northern Georgia known for its highest mountains and gorgeous views. This includes those you can see right through the greenhouse. And speaking of views, dear passengers, on the right side under our wings is the harsh and beautiful Ushba mountain, one of the symbols of Svaneti. We will talk a little bit more about it later in this video. With such beauty overboard, passengers fall into 2 categories. Those who can't take their eyes off the views and let the camera out of their hands, even though this is not their first such flight. And those who had more interesting dreams until the moment of descent at Mestia airport. just the best flight I could ever imagine. What makes this flight especially wonderful is the fact that a trip here from Tbilisi by car would take more than 8 hours, and the flight lasts just under an hour. Well, long live civil aviation. Our luggage, by the way, was carried partly in the front of the plane and partly in the cabin. We take our luggage out by ourselves and move towards the receiving airport. I should say a few words about it. It is both the smallest and the most stylish airport I have ever seen. As well as several other buildings in Mestia, it was designed by a German architect company, and in fact, the whole airport's premise is a couple of workplaces and a control room and a tower section, and a small stylish lounge on the first floor, which is both the waiting room, a sales office, and a terminal for arrivals. And this micro airport only works a couple of times a week during these wonderful flights from Natakhtari and Kutaisi. By the way, I almost forgot the most important thing. You can only buy tickets for this regional flight on Vanilla Sky's website, or you can come to the airport on the day of departure and try your luck with the available seats. If you want more picturesque views and interesting travel facts, hit subscribe. Well, I'm going to continue planning my current trip because I have nowhere to live. I didn't book anything in advance because I wasn't sure until the end that I would take this flight. By the way, housing was not a problem, because I met some guys from Ukraine right on the plane who had already booked a place to stay, so I thought, why not live at the same place? Which was the Kenny Margiani guest house. This sign and TripAdvisor sticker are the only things that gave away that it's a guest house. From the outside, it's a typical Georgian yard with its inherent chaos and, of course, the Mitsubishi Delica. Everybody owns one in Georgia. Jumping from stone to stone in the courtyard, imagining that the dirt around is lava, and then climbing up the worn stairs. Who would expect that the impression inside might change dramatically? You walk into the room and see that it's very decent. Here's some stone wall. Everything is beautifully paneled with wood, the bed is comfortable, and there's a separate bathroom, but most importantly, it costs $12 for the night. I don't know if it's always this cheap, but it's the best price for the coziness and loft style. Hey, what are you doing here? That's what I thought. Come on in. Oh, and the local dog sometimes likes to drop in for a visit. Right, buddy? This buddy is probably the sweetest pit bull I've ever met. We've hit it off the first day, and then walked around the neighborhood together. The only thing is that this guy would need to rethink his diet a bit. Oh my god! I'm not sure who to be more afraid of in this house, the pit bull or the cat named Thomas. On the first floor is the kitchen where I met the hosts most often. They're 100% true to the typical description of the Svans. Don't talk much, but are very hospitable. Several times, for example, they just drove me around town. And when they started making hachapuri with kash mijabi, a traditional Svan mixture of potatoes and cheese, they noticed I had a camera with me. They asked me to document the process of baking this gluten bomb. Well, that's exactly what I came here for. And then, in a tone that didn't take no for an answer, they sat me down to taste it all. It's really, really delicious. This is something you can't buy in a store. There's a matri preserved in the yard. It's a traditional sand dwelling, but unfortunately there was no light inside, so I will show you how it looks from the inside a little later on the example of a museum. Also, to my surprise, there was this terrace with a view of the mountains. In my opinion, this place is such a typical antipode of the standard tourist trap, where everything seems to look good and pretty on the booking website, but when you come to the place, everything is mediocre. And by the way, everything in Mestia is so inexpensive and authentic. Well, I guess it's time to talk a little about the town. Despite the fact that only 2,000 people live here, Mestia is rightly considered the main town of Svaneti. It is located at an altitude of 1,500 meters, of course surrounded by beautiful high mountains, and getting here by land is not an easy quest. That's why no one has ever conquered these lands historically. Therefore, traditions and, at some places, architecture have remained in their original form. The old neighborhoods of Mestia look really like the Middle Ages. All these walls made of stone, a road paved with cobblestones. In general, it's very authentic. Another characteristic detail adds flavor. It's the cows. Cows are everywhere, and everyone waits patiently for them to get out of the way. No one touches them. It's like a branch of India in northwest Georgia. This, by the way, has nothing to do with any special statues of the cows. Moreover, it is purely a winter story. In the summer, cows are on pastures high in the mountains, but in the cold, there is nothing to do there, and they feed on harvested hay and machubi and grazed on the roads until the summer. At the same time, for contrast, there is a very futuristic building made by the same German architects right next door. This, for example, is a police station. And this is the city administration. And here is the Ethnographic Museum of Svaneti. The museum is small, but quite rich. Its main purpose is to show through all these exhibits that the Svans are not just a part of Georgia, it's really a separate nation with its own traditions, culture, and language, unlike any other in the world. Still, the main attraction or historical artifact of Svaneti is not in the museum, but in the streets of the city. Swan towers against a backdrop of mountains are the signature image of these regions. These structures, 60 to 100 feet high, were built back in the first millennium from stones that were avalanched down from the mountains. Families attached them to residential buildings in order to defend themselves in case of internecine conflicts, because external enemies, as we know, did not come here much, and that's how these things work. The entrance is on the second floor, and on the ground floor, where the walls are thickest, there is a living room with a hearth in the middle, where the family is safe. Above is the storehouse of provisions, and at the very top is a tower with loopholes, through which stones were thrown and shots were fired at the besiegers. By the way, some doubt this theory because the loopholes don't look as if they are convenient to conduct offense through them. But anyway, these days the tower is used as a food warehouse, like a cellar, only upwards. And of course as a local symbol and tourist attraction. Many towers are locked, but if you look harder, you can find an open one that you can climb out and admire the sunset. And incidentally, there's another story that among other things, the towers were used as beacons. In case of danger, a bonfire was lit on the top and neighbors were warned. So the main function of these structures were notifications and protection of the house. Wait a sec, so people are 13 minutes into the video and haven't hit that like button and subscribed yet? Nope. Well, now let's go to a place that is probably one of the main attractions of Mestia and probably the whole of Svaneti. This typical Mestia house with its Svan tower is the museum of the great climber Mikhail Khergiani. Every sport has had its phenomenon. Lionel Messi in soccer, Michael Jordan in basketball, Michael Phelps in swimming, but Michael Khergiani for mountaineering was probably on an even higher level than all of them. He is the main local superhero. The streets are named in his honor, anniversary concerts are held in his memory, and in fact, his house became a museum, where one of his distant relatives, by the way, also a mountain climber, very infectiously and colorfully talks about all of his achievements.
Он 7 раз подряд стал чемпионом Советского Союза подряд. Ты что, в полумиллиардном стране один, что ли, являешься? Конкуренция была, конечно, очень большая, очень большая. Он был явлением для мира альпинизма, потому что он был как великим альпинистом, так и великим скалолазом тоже. Это разные вещи, вы хорошо знаете. Альпинизм – это высоты, большие горы, лед, высота, скалолазание, спортивный пробег, в некоторых промежутках то побыстрее.
And to me, it sounds as if Usain Bolt, for example, was also running marathons at the same high level. In general, in his time as well as nowadays, Khergiani's climbing was something unreal.
10-дневный маршрут за 17 часов. Вот такие великие восхождения у него. Очень много, которые не повторяются до сих пор.
And the museum has a lot of things about his great climbs, and of course about the history of mountaineering in those years. What I found most interesting was the rudimentary equipment that climbers used back then in the middle of the 20th century. Of course, there was no Gore-Tex and carbon outfit at that time, which makes all his records all the more amazing. By the way, Khergiani considered his greatest achievement not the climbing, but the people he had rescued in the mountains. The tour to the Khergiani Museum is really very interesting, and it's a great incentive to climb some mountains, but to be honest, I'm not a very good mountaineer and rock climber. There are 2 ski resorts near Mestia that could be suitable for that purpose, and that's good news. And the first of them is Hatsvali. The chairlift to Hatsvali is visible from any point in Mestia. It's in fact an urban resort. This lift, which goes almost from the town, opened just a couple of years ago and made the logistics of getting to the resort much easier. Let's start by closing the financial issue. Chairlifts everywhere in Georgia are very cheap, and a seasonal ski pass applies to all resorts in the country, including Svaneti. It makes sense to go up even without equipment because firstly, the lift has one of the best views of all of Mestia, and secondly, at the top station at an altitude of 7,600, you will find the highest mountain restaurant in Georgia, Zeruldi. But before having a good meal, you need to go for a good skiing. In fact, there are only 2 chairlifts and a few trails, but everyone comes here mainly for the forest skiing. And to stay in the context of the restaurant, the forest skiing here is best combined with the fresh snowfall sauce. Anyway, this is what an almost perfect day in Hatsvali looks like. And into the woods, right? Secret spot. Here it is, fluffy forest. Japan. It's just like Japan. Even though I haven't been to Japan, it's probably a similar place. This is... This is so cool! Everything okay there?
Whoa!
At the end of the almost perfect day, let's go to Mestia for a well-deserved dinner. There aren't very many open places in Mestia right now, but among those that remain open, there's a couple that I can recommend, as well as a few Georgian dishes that go beyond the traditional flour madness. And the first place on our program is Layla, in honor of one of the mountains that surround Mestia. It's probably the most famous restaurant here with a nice and stylish interior and quality service. The food is beef stewed in tomato sauce and eggplants with nut butter. The second place is a tiny bar with the cute name Booba. This place wasn't easy to find, but it's insanely ambient. Behind the bar is a friendly and charismatic bartender who moved here from Tbilisi to join his family, and the prices on the menu are ridiculously low. One thing I'd recommend trying is the signature Georgian salad with nuts. My favorite Georgian dish is chicken in a creamy garlic sauce. And one of the traditional Svan dishes is chizvari. It's a corn tortilla with a cheese filling. It's just unbelievably delicious. According to the glorious Georgian tradition, let's work off the calories by snowboarding, and the second resort in Svaneti needs a little ride. The road from Mestia to Tetnuldi is very beautiful, but quite long and complicated, so local drivers will ask at least 130 laris for a round trip. So I was very lucky to meet Igor and Sofia and Hatsvali, other guys from Ukraine who rented a car in Tbilisi and drove it around Georgia with a free back seat. And how much did it cost? How long did you rent the car for? $500? Wow, that's really cheap. With this car, we'll have a whole separate adventure, but we'll get back to that later in the program, so to say. In the meantime, we're on our way to Tetnuldi. So, what do you need to know about Tetnuldi? The resort in terms of lifts and slopes is extremely small. There are only 4 lifts and very few trails, but it's very high in the mountains, located at the foot of the 3rd highest mountain in Georgia. It's somewhere here. This is Tetnuldi. The altitude is about 15,900 feet, and the free ride, for which in fact everyone comes here, is appropriate. There's a lot of big open lines, and you need to take a few precautions before you go there. Well, first of all, the sanctus sanctorum of all freeriders is a working and tested avalanche beacon. Secondly, an avalanche probe with a shovel in a backpack, and if possible, the backpack itself with an avalanche cushion. Third, a chapstick so that the spring sun doesn't turn your lips into chaff. And of course, sunscreen. At the lower station, there are several cafeterias with very tasty and expensive food. We'll return to them on our way back. A chain of 3 lifts goes to the very top, but the 3rd one is actually often closed after snowfalls or in bad weather. By the way, the Austrians helped to build and develop the resort, and they really spent all their chairlifts required. These are some of the most comfortable lifts I've ever seen. Oh, we're so lucky. The 3rd lift to the top is working. The top of the resort is at 11,500 feet. The steepest trails and freeride routes start from here. And of course, paragliders with their paragliders. Beautiful. What can I say? But the lift here is closed much of the time for a reason. Most of the lines that lead downhill are very avalanche prone. Therefore, only the most experienced freeriders and only in groups go up here for the difficult rounds. We had a more conservative route in mind, which goes down to the 4th side lift. And to show it, let's turn to a familiar story. Guys, first line. And the best part was that almost no one rode these routes but us, so we could go back there again and again. Passing the snow cornice, carefully without driving off the edge, give a few moves, and drop. Boom! Let's go! Yeah, what a snow! Let's go for one more drop. Nice and clean. And drop! Yeah! And another drop. Look at those cool, fluffy fields. Oh, what a day! I'm glad I didn't go home today. Well, the free ride in the deserted Tetnuldi is a delight. It's one of those places where you don't want to film because you can't capture this pleasure with the camera. But let me show you the promised cafeterias at the lower station. Whether it was skiing at such a high altitude or the mountain air, but everything we tasted here was just amazing, including the shish kebab, which is not a Georgian dish, and the cheese hachapuri, which is, on the contrary, very Georgian food. And of course, shawarma. And it's not just about the taste. This is probably the most beautiful view I've ever seen behind a shawarma stall. And it's not just a shawarma with a view of the mountains, it's a shawarma with the view of Ushba. As I said at the beginning of the video when we flew over it, it is one of the symbols of Svaneti. In good weather, you can see it from any point of Hatsvali, Tetnuldi, or even the way here. And this mountain is jaw-droppingly beautiful. It's like 2 Matterhorns for the price of 1, and it's very difficult to climb. Mikhail Khergiani's father, for example, became famous for his first climbs of this mountain, which were considered impossible at the time. But time is passing, and the North Face recently released a short film about how they skied down this mountain. But we're not quite ready for Ushba skiing yet, so let's glide down with the view of it in Tetnuldi and return back to Mestia. After this sunny Tetnuldi, my nose is burnt like basically anything I try to cook. So today we'll take a day off from skiing and go to a very interesting place. The 2.5-hour drive from Mestia to Ushguli was very stressful for both the driver and the car. On one side are the steep cliffs that tend to sprinkle onto the road sometimes, and on the other side is a cliff with a mountain river downhill which didn't look stable enough in the spring. The drive went relatively well, and we finally reached our destination. Ushguli is a community of 4 villages in the highlands of Svaneti. With an altitude of 7,218 feet, they're considered one of the highest settlements in all of Europe. But what's even more interesting, one of the villages is Cheshashi. Its unique Phoenician towers are listed as a UNESCO heritage site. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a closer look at it because everything is very much covered in snow. And of course, the best time to come here is in the summer, when everything is green and looks more or less like this. But we didn't come all this way just to see the snow-covered towers of Ushguli from afar. Well, the highest mountain in Georgia, Shkhara, should be visible somewhere there, but the forecast was partly cloudy, and the weather changed not in our favor. Let's wait and hope that the mountain will open. For all my love to Georgia, it was only on this trip, which is 6th by the way, that I learned that its highest mountain is not Kazbek, but Shkhara, with a top at 17,000 feet. And while we wait for it to appear from behind the clouds, let's quickly visit another interesting place in Ushguli. This lonely Svan tower is the Lamaria Church. According to a legend, Queen Tamara is buried right here under it. Actually, she was one of the main figures in the history of Georgia, but unfortunately we couldn't get inside. But it doesn't matter, because look what finally came out of the clouds. Good news! Shkhara is finally almost completely open and looks amazing. The bad news is, together with the border guards, we are digging out our Jeep because it got stuck in the snow. Let me tell you how this embarrassment happened. So we were standing there waiting for the weather window, but after an hour, we realized that we wouldn't see anything. We decided to go home, but the Jeep said, nope. The wheels of the SUV had dug into the loose snow, and we had to dig them out with whatever means at our disposal. Half an hour of sluggish digging the snow with a snowboard didn't help, but help came when a snowmobile with local border guards appeared on the horizon. In addition to giving us confidence that there were living people here, they also brought a shovel which made things go more briskly, and after another half an hour of snow digging, the mountain finally came out and it arranged probably the coolest wallpaper we've ever had to dig up a car in front of. But unfortunately, even with a shovel, the snow of Svaneti didn't want to let us go anywhere. One more try. Looks like we're staying here. And we're really going to ask to let us stay overnight, but rescue came from where we weren't expecting. Another car came to get us out. Fortunately, the Georgians were very helpful and volunteered to get us out of the trap for 50 laris. The official population of Ushguli is around 200 people, and in winter I think even less, so we were very lucky to find this gentleman who agreed to work as a tow truck. Finally, we were pulled out of this snow trap, even though not at the first attempt. Didi Madloba again, guys! And we really had to get home before dark and avoid driving blindly along that same road. But with such a sunset, the temptation to stop and once again admire the views of Ushguli is too great. This whole adventure with getting stuck and stuff was for a reason, after all. It made it possible to take this shot. The view of Lamaria against the background of Shkhara is one of the main views of Svaneti for postcards and magnets, and I'm so glad that I captured it on the way back, even more in this lighting. On our way home, we saw several other people from Ushguli's small population, and then I wondered, could I have withstood the rigors of life in such a beautiful, yet very remote land? And no matter how much I love the mountains, perhaps the answer is no. I'm a city boy, after all. According to the forecast, the cloud cover in the next few days will be as changeable as possible, so unfortunately I won't be able to leave here by plane. Therefore, I'll get to Tbilisi by a combination of a minivan to Zagdidi and a Zagdidi Tbilisi train. By the way, this combination will cost me about $10, which means that the minivan ride will cost about $4 and the fast train will cost about $6. If we talk about Svaneti, it's probably, if not my favorite, then certainly one of my favorite regions in Georgia. And you can come here in any season. Just imagine how beautiful it will be when everything blossoms and turns green in summer, and you can just come here and take a beautiful walk in the mountains. There's a reason why Mestia is considered one of the tracking centers of Georgia. And of course, you can and should come here in winter when there are 2 ski resorts and a lot of options for skiing. I personally would like to come back here with all of my ski touring equipment and hike in slightly less accessible places. And in contrast to Gadari, which for the most part exists at the expense of and for the tourists, this is quite a lively, real and authentic town where you can come and enjoy the Georgian vibe. And I hope that I've succeeded in conveying at least part of this vibe. And as always, thank you so much for watching this video and see you in the next one. And this is the voiceover after the closing titles during another session of overnight editing of this video. I hope it was worth it. And, of course, don't forget all the YouTube buttons to help the channel grow. A like, subscription, comment, and share with your friends. Thanks!